Taip, tai gerą dieną.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I can see many of you here after the opening ceremony. Our agenda is very tight. Today we will debate on the achievements of the previous legislature and our expectations for the new legislature in the area of human rights, because I believe that this is extremely important and this is not a secondary matter in any way. Some technical remarks for you. I want to inform all the participants that later on the internet, you will be able to find the recordings of this forum. I don't want to limit your freedom of speech, but please mind your words because they will appear online. We will have 75 minutes, and 10 of them I would like to dedicate for the questions and answer session with the panelists. Now, since the technical issues are clear, now I have to introduce the panelists of today. One of our panelists is on the radio program. She will join us later. And today with us, we have Tomas Vytautas Raskevičius, former chair of the Human Rights Committee of the Seimas. He is the chair of the Freedom Party. We also have professor of Vilnius University, Dovilė Jankniūnaitė. She is famous for commenting on foreign issues. Human rights is also her area of interest. And also we have the new chair of the Human Rights Committee, Mr. Laurynas Šedvytis, and lawyer, legal researcher, expert in human rights, former chair of the Lithuanian Constitutional Court, that will guide us in the legal labyrinth, which is Danutė Jočienė. These are panelists. Jūratė Juškaitė, head of the Lithuanian Center for Human Rights, will join us later. Thomas, let us start with you. For 30 years, Lithuania has been implementing the Convention on Guaranteeing Human Rights and Freedoms. We have joined the convention, which is dedicated for elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And we will celebrate the 20th anniversary of this convention in Lithuania. How do you see our position? If you look at Human Rights Index, we are not taking a very good position compared to, for example, Estonia or neighbor Latvia. Certainly, indices can have different nuances, but this is the reality. And we also have some negative indexes in Lithuania. What decisions we need in order to be ranked higher according to the indices in order to achieve the EU average? Thank you. When you ask about Human Rights Convention, it was ratified in 1995, 30 years in Lithuania, and the main thing is that not conventions or adopted laws change the society, but the society changes in addition or together with the conventions and laws adopted. If we sum up the previous legislature and its activities, human rights were very clearly defined as the item on the agenda of the previous legislature. When I reflect on that, I have many hopes that, by seeing that these are very important issues among the public. In comparison with other countries and also our neighboring countries, Lithuania is lagging behind on certain aspects, but it depends on the point of reference. Of course, we want to be like Nordic countries, other European countries, but if we compare Lithuania with any other country, Lithuania has made a real progress in 30 years. What is really worth our attention is that socioeconomic and economic rights and ensuring those rights by focusing on access to all people to dignity and access to the achievements in social economic sphere. Some groups in societies face some institutional limitations, institutional restrictions, cannot participate in society to the full, and we have to ensure these groups access to participation in public life. Probably in the future, other issues will also be raised that are equally important. We have Jūratė Juškaitė here with us. I would like to ask you, Ms. Juškaitė, my question is the continuation of the question given to Mr. Raškevičius. What type of decisions do we need today? And what are the most painful aspects in terms of human rights in Lithuania? I've mentioned many indices that Lithuania is not ranking very high, especially in comparison with other countries such as Latvia and Estonia. You, as the head of the Center for Human Rights, can you give your vision on what are our shortbacks that preclude us from ranking high? Thank you for your question and for engaging me in this debate. Well, I tried to listen to what Thomas has said. Well, this is not a beauty contest, and it is not important what place Lithuania is ranked at. The most important thing is the access and the ability of people in Lithuania to enjoy their rights to the full. When I think about the most painful points and sensitive points, what do you think? Which situation is more dire, whether a woman that is being abused or a person who is not able to have access to all the possibilities in life? I believe that all the situations are very personal and very different. But when we speak about the political agenda and the issues that could be solved in a simpler way, because disability issues require a lot of investment, they're very wide. When we speak about simpler terms, the agenda is quite clear and visible. I heard that the chair of the Committee on Human Rights is very positive about the recognition of Romova community, and we have lost the case in European Human Rights on that, the Court of Human Rights on that. And other issues that we will not be avoiding is the recognition of a partnership and the same-sex families. And yesterday you were able to read on the candidate to the Minister of Environment. I was shocked that a person with such a background, a violent background, is among the candidates for the Minister of the Environment. And this demonstrates that we still lack the understanding of the issue of violence against women. And this is yet another item on our agenda, which is the Istanbul Convention and the full uh, implementation of that. We are hearing alternative ideas on that. The EU directive on violence against women and transposition of this directive, certainly many positive achievements would be made in Lithuania, but certainly the directive of the EU is much narrower than the Istanbul Convention. I think that we will be able to evaluate those two legal documents. We still have an hour left until the announcement of the equality index in Lithuania. Now, let us look at the year 2023. We were ranked 17, and we have improved here, but it's not because household chores are being shared equally by men and women, but because household chores are becoming easier for women due to some technological achievements. Can we identify at least certain important, serious decisions that are needed here in this area, and which are the most problematic areas? Laurinas, you spoke in your intro in the uh, opening part on that. How do you evaluate Lithuania's position in this area?
We should understand that regarding the pay gap, we live in a very peculiar society where certain professions and sectors are related to gender. My history teacher who taught us about the Soviet period, he would joke about lawyers and judges during the Soviet times. And why? And no one could explain that because at that time lawyers were female and judges were only male. It is paradoxical because in public institutions 70% of employees are women. In educational institutions, the percentage is similar. And public investments into certain sectors, they decrease inequality if wages are increased in those sectors. But it's just the games of statistics. And it comes from the feminist theory. And when wages are increased, then more men enter those sectors. Well, it is a question of prestige. And as for public investments into various sectors, maybe they would be helpful. But I would like to raise another problem. We talk about being transparent about people's wages, about wages of managers, the so-called blue-collar jobs are not affected by that. And Lithuania should implement the directive that has a requirement to make the wages public if those wages are more than 5% similar. And my question is that, are those measures helpful? because they are helpful in top management sector, but not elsewhere. And for example, our trolleybus drivers and their pay gap, I don't know about it. I don't know information about it. So when we talk in abstract terms, I still have questions. Where will it take us? Because if it helps in the sector of top management, it's okay. But if we went lower to other sectors, I still have many questions left. Dovile, I've read an interview of your colleague, and he raised the questions what people in Lithuania are not equal, and I thought, well, that's a good start. Of course, I'm being ironic. What do you think? Are those indices indicating inequality? How do you, as an academic, see it? What are we unable to identify it, or what decisions we're not able to make, which would be very relevant and needed? How do you see the situation as an academic? Good morning. Congratulations on the International Days of Human Rights. It's a beautiful day to hold these discussions. Many people in this audience already know about these issues. So how the ideas should be transformed into the decisions? That's $1 million question. But coming back to the EIGE index, Lithuania is below the average, but two areas in the index should be highlighted. Is the area of political representation, which was improved because we see more positions of female leadership positions. And it is obvious that in 2025, this index won't be as good. But today, out of 12, we have only 4 female ministers. And when it comes to Seimas committees, there are only 3 female chair out of the 16 Seimas committees. The situation is not great. And as for the deputy speakers of the Speaker of the Seimas, the situation is better, but not many women were appointed as chairs of the Seimas committees. And at municipal level, we have many structural problems, and this index won't improve. And we can have questions how to include more women into politics and top leadership positions. This is one challenge, because a variety of research studies show that increasing of the variety in the management help to make better decisions, to achieve better dynamic, help to address certain questions. Different people can approach different questions differently, and different people can provide for a more constructive space, which sets a tone for discussions, for political culture. It may seem that it's not relevant, but it is actually very important. And another area is household living, and women spend disproportionate time doing household chores and taking care of other family members. And Lithuania is at the very bottom of the European Union. How to create the structural changes? And is it rude to ask dads to spend several months when their child is born? Because one of those steps uh, uh, showing what it means is this rule. And obligatory political measures cannot do that, cannot create structural changes. We always look back to the political decisions and political discussions. And as from the political point of view, we've had certain uh, political statements that are very difficult to interpret. We've heard a lot of things, but what I want to ask is what has happened to the topic of human rights, because it has become especially polarizing. When we talk about taxes, yes, we understand what happens, but when it comes to human rights, it's not the case, because if someone else is granted more rights, my human rights do not diminish. But some people understand that if Thomas gets additional rights, someone will be hurt because of that, even though it's not the case. Why are these questions so polarizing in our society, even though the adoption of certain decisions won't even affect certain people?
Well, there are three deep reasons for that. Two are deeper, and one is a more superficial. Speaking about the deep rooted reasons, we think about human rights in universal terms, such as the right, freedom of speech, right to vote, and we agree on that more or less. And we all see that the rights are universal, but we take another step and look at people who are not in the core, but who are in the on the margins due to certain prejudice, certain subjective beliefs, certain attitudes, people belonging to LGBT communities of a different race, and people on the margins are fewer, and therefore we don't tend to focus on them that much because they are seen as smaller groups and weaker groups, and their rights are not seen as that important compared to other people. Another reason is that when the changes begin, people start feeling unsafe due to different reasons. And in my work, I see many young women who are doing the same work as me, and I feel unsafe because of that, and I resort to irrational explanations. And the third reason, and the superficial reason, is that we have sentiments due to structural changes in society. They can be found in any historical period. We have groups of people who use this narrative for their own reasons, for their own purposes, saying that, for example, that one or another right is unnecessary, and people use the fears of people for their own purposes. And there's a rhetoric that that by addressing some issues we fail or by addressing some rights, we fail to address other rights. Now, a very tricky question. We might understand that there's many manipulation behind that, and politicians tend to also resort to manipulation when speaking about some legal aspects. My question is to Danutė Jočienė. For example, the Constitutional Court made its conclusion on the Istanbul Convention. It is being ignored by politicians. We have the draft law on the civil union, and politicians tend to say that this is in conflict with our constitution. And there's a myth that every achievement we want to make conflicts with the constitution. Can we really assume that politicians have a different constitution in mind? What is your vision on this unclarity in the agenda and the draft law on civil union? What is the relation between this draft law and the constitution? Could you explain to us and guide us in the right direction? Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to take part in this debate. And I congratulate you on the International Day of Human Rights. And for me, as a teacher, I am very glad to see many students here among the audience. In terms of your question, members of parliament can answer this question, what the arguments are. But we can put it in very simple terms. In today's debate and discussions, both in the introductory part and now, we forget a very important core document that we have. This is our Constitution. The Constitution adopted in 1992. We consider it to be the supreme law that establishes all the principles established in all European acts, which is the principle of non-discrimination, the principle of equality of all people, respect to human dignity, protection of private life. In my understanding, all these constitutional values include all those European values, and they should be defended on the national level. Therefore, we should not polarize between our documents and European documents. The Constitutional Court, in its doctrine, has concluded and underlined certain important principles that are often forgotten in Lithuania. The Constitutional Court concludes that the Constitution does not guarantee lower standards than in the European documents. So we can speak about any convention of the European Union or the Istanbul Convention. The Constitutional Court also concludes that Constitution defends wider rights than those established in the European documents. Therefore, we should not make a division between those two systems, because the constitutional protection that we have is much wider than that guaranteed by the European acts. And the third aspect that we discuss very widely today is the principle of non-discrimination. The Constitutional Court has proven by its practice that although the list of aspects of non-discrimination is finite, the Constitutional Court has said that it is not that it is infinite, and that the list of aspects of non-discrimination can include other things such as age, sexual orientation, and others. So based on our Constitution, we have a very good basis for defending human rights. The main question is how we defend those rights in practice. When we come to the practical terms, we face many difficulties. In terms of the draft law on civil union, I would like to remind you that in 2013, there was an important case, Palalatos versus Greece. The European Court of Human Rights concluded that there are two member states, Greece and Lithuania, that by establishing the institution of partnership should open it for same-sex people. And the study has been conducted, and in the decision of the European Court of Human Rights, this study is mentioned. If politicians refer to this decision of the court, they would understand the clear naming of Lithuania and Greece as an exception. So my great wish for the Committee on Human Rights to refer to the case of Palelatas versus Greece. Hopefully this will be done. Professor, I would like to ask another question. Romuva is something that we have focused, and the European Court of Human Rights has made certain decisions on that. What is your evaluation? Are these mistakes made by Lithuania? It seems that the decisions will be finally taken, but what are the lessons that should be learned from that?
I would like to address it in a broader manner. We should not oppose these two cases, the case that was in the Constitutional Court and the one that was in the Court of the Human Rights. But those cases are often opposed. In the Constitutional Court, they were discussing about terms. Is 25 years is not against the Constitution to ask for the status of certain religious communities? Among the members of the Seimas, there were proposals to extend this period up to 70 to 100 years. And then there was an appeal to the Constitutional Court that 25 years is not enough time for a certain institution to earn its status in the state. Another aspect that the Constitutional Court mentioned was the term of 10 years to ask for that status in the state for one more time in 10 years. And as we know, this problem was solved. Seimas amended this very long term. The European Court of Human Rights discussed the act of recognition, and the court ruled that that the state recognizes a certain religion during the established procedures. The procedure has to be non-discriminatory. It does not have to, it cannot discriminate certain religious communities. And I would like to mention this to the new chair of the Committee on Human Rights. The court said that Seimas, by refusing to recognize a certain religious community, has to argue their decision very clearly and very well. So I hope that Romuva is acknowledged by the Seimas, and there's nothing more I can comment on that. In the official institutional doctrine, there's a principle of free mandate of a member of the Seimas. There's not a lot of members of the Seimas here with us, and maybe the new members of the Seimas are not very familiar with this principle, but this principle means that members of the Seimas are not entirely free when voting, even though they have the mandate. But members of the Seimas, when voting, they have to act in line with constitutions and in accordance to law. Even though the mandate is free, it actually obliges members of the Seimas to respect constitution and laws and to respect international commitments because it's Lithuanians' duty to implement them. When you want to follow this principle, you have to read the constitution at first, but it does not always happen. I would like to come back to Jūrate. How would you evaluate the main works of the previous legislature that helped to improve the status of human rights in Lithuania? Because many people say that there were only talks, but nothing was done. What is your opinion about that? What was done in the last legislature? Let's put the Istanbul Convention of on the agenda of the Seimas, and those who vote against it will be they will violate the constitution. I would like to express my criticisms that the question of migration was not solved in an appropriate manner. And this question was a rude violation of human rights that Lithuania and Lithuania's government and members of the Seimas committed. I would like to highlight that, and it's important to mention that. On the other hand, when we look at the past Seimas, let's remember the question of letters W. The question has been solved in Lithuania for 35 years throughout the years of Lithuania's independence, and it was solved by the last Seimas. It is a big plus, and it shows the paradox that when the issue is on the political agenda, everyone is having fights. But when the issue is solved, we don't even remember that it was on the agenda. From my point of view, amendments to the law on domestic violence and the introduction of the order, the order, the protection order allows the police to make the perpetrator to leave his or her house for 15 days. A lot of those protection orders have been issued, and certain political figures, top political leaders, actually question this protection order, and they did not believe in the number of the orders issued, because in some cases those orders are issued but those orders managed to protect several thousands of lives of women. So looking at the last legislative terms, these questions pop to my mind.
Tomai,
One life is really a lot. I will not be asking about your legislature. It is not very easy to sum up your own achievements. I want to forecast the future. How do you see the current government program? Human rights is not a focus there, but anyway, what do you think is very needed there, and is there any lack of any points in the government program? After reading the government program, human rights are put as a separate part there. Gender equality is a focus there, the activities of human rights organizations and institutions. And there is a mention of the prevention of incitement of hatred against certain groups of society. Well, we have this on paper, but at this very stage is tactless and unethical to give any comments because this is a Polaroid photograph that will be seen later. Today, the Seimas will be voting for Romuva community. We will let Mr. Chairman go and participate in voting. And finally, we have to wait in order to make a general view. We see certain tendencies that some parties have made their choice. Some parties want to protect human rights, and others want to advocate for traditional values. So we will see whether this will be translated into practical decisions. But I don't want to moralize everything politically, but when fight against anti-Semitism is within the government program, but a ruling party is the party that is anti-Semitic, this is a conflict for me. It means that the government will be fighting something that it enables itself. We saw certain protests and rallies here near Martynas Mažvydas library. But things that happened yesterday when we have a candidate for the minister, and this candidate is allegedly suspected in violence against women, and this is unacceptable for me. Those people who say that they support human rights agenda, I believe, should express their position or opinion on that, and rather than saying that this is a political decision. I don't know whether I can remark on that. I'm not surprised about this. If we have psychological or verbal violence in some groups, and this is considered a norm, and this is done on a daily basis, and it is not easy to tolerate that. Why should we be surprised that some people do not consider physical violence to be a crime? We have a lot of non-physical violence among our politicians, and in the rhetoric of some politicians, we can really clearly see that. And this case with possible physical violence and the candidate allegedly suspected in physical violence. Now I would like to give the floor to Lauryna Šedvytis. I think that this provision in the government program is because of the composition of the coalition, and we do not know about the content of that. Or maybe I'm mistaken. What's the reason about including this provision into the government program? Well, personally, I believe that naming something or including this provision, yes, this is a result of their reaction to the ruling coalition and its composition. But we have some other dubious personalities that are not being questioned. But we have one person, Mr. Žemaitaitis, who is being, whose rhetoric is being discussed very widely and actively. And we had some members of parliament who were defending double genocide theory. But when we speak about Žemaitaitis and his party, this seems to be negative. No, the question is for you. What is your vision on that? Let us not discuss history. How do you see this concrete issue? Well, having program which includes fight against anti-Semitism and xenophobia, and there were some other strange proposals. I think that we need such a program because we have some prejudices that affect negatively the lives of certain groups of people. If you want my opinion on Nemuno Aušra party, well, this is not a perfect political force and imperfect leader of this force. And we are rather cornered because of that. Jūratė was raising her hand because she wanted to comment on that.
I would like to react to what Laurynas has just said. Yes, that has to be critically evaluated, and I don't feel very big love for Mr. Žemaitaitis, and I'm not afraid to admit it, but it is paradoxical that Thomas mentioned an oxymoron regarding the government's position and anti-Semitism. But during the last legislature, Ms. Faina Koklansky raised so many questions regarding the rights of Jews in Lithuania. So this is a political context that has to be taken into consideration. I think it is a certain response mentioning anti-Semitism in the program because it is clearly worded and it's a clear reaction to the inclusion of the Žemaitaitis party. However, the question was not solved during the previous 4 years. But as for the remarks by Žemaitaitis, to put it mildly, they're not okay. And then we look at the remarks by Mr. Kasčiūnas, and I remember the video where he shouts at migrants using swear words, and I remember him referring to them as people from those cultures. And Mr. Kasčiūnas, despite all of his political past and let alone his history from 20 years ago, he was appointed a minister, and he might be the leader of one political group. So I think the previous situation and the current situation are both problematic, and they have to be talked about and understood, because now we have several political forces that say we are morally progressive and pure. And yes, there are many people that we talked to during the last legislature and who supported human rights decisions. But let's take a critical look at the previous Seimas and at the current one. Mr. Laurinas, just 2 seconds. The voting regarding Gramova took place. 7-1 votes are already in favor. I hope the point I mentioned in the government's program regarding anti-Semitism will have its content and it will be implemented. And I hope that manifestations of violence will be curbed in Lithuania. But coming back to the program, there is a provision on incentive measures regarding gender quotas. We talked about gender distribution in the Seimas committees because it is concerning. Is this provision easily implemented, and what can we expect? Quotas are rather difficult. Quotas are helpful in short term to solve long standing problems, but how are they implemented? It is important to notice, and sometimes quotas implemented by laws create certain problems. When quotas are implemented on voluntary basis, it's a better solution. But there is a bad reputation regarding gender quotas, and when they're imposed, women, for example, might lose some self-esteem. They are two-sided, and we should transform the question. We should not be thinking in terms of quotas. We have to be reflective in our interviewing processes, how we set up committees. Are there various mentorship programs? Are there conditions for women for motherhood and career? So quotas is a crude measure, but they can work. And if they don't work, we invite someone to take that place. This can be solved by looking at the problem more systematically. But it's difficult to do. However, there are many things that can be done both in the area of politics and economics that can be done. And as for the Seimas and the government, we talked about the program, and the government's program is not the same as the Seimas program. And I would be curious to see the Seimas program for the spring session because it would be important to hear. And you referred to the opening remarks by Mr. Skvernelis, who said that the last legislature did not solve any human rights issues and it's about to change. But now the situation is not much better. We have 20 people who will not be voting on issues related to human rights, and we will have to find votes in the oppositions, and it might be difficult to do. And there's no qualitative difference between the new and the old Seimas, and compromises will have to be made. It won't be easy, and I have a question for for Danutė Jočienė. The program has a provision about transposition of EU directive on fight against violence against women and domestic violence. From the legal point of view, can you see the added value of this directive? What would help us to regulate the legal base of Lithuania?
I don't see any advantages in this directive because in Lithuania we have a very good legal framework, including the constitution. Now I'm working with the criminal cases, and the number of cases of domestic violence is really very high. But we don't have only violence in domestic violence, but also cases where women are violent against men. And we should not be speaking about violence against women or domestic violence against women, because domestic violence takes different forms, and the variety of cases is a proof of that. The problem among these cases is that the investigations are being carried out, and it takes a lot of time. And sometimes they're not high priority not considered to be high priority cases. If we speak about the EU directive, in the legal discussion, it was clearly said that if the European Union fails to transpose EU legal acts, it can be punished by sanctions. And there's no other option for that. I want to mention one more thing. I feel to be really old when I discuss human rights. I graduated in the Faculty of Law in 1994, and I wanted to be the teacher in the faculty. And my teacher said, well, actually, women are not teachers in this faculty because we have only 3 women teachers in our faculty. And there was only one professor, Vadapalas, that I really respect very much, who included me in his department and allowed me to work as a teacher in the Faculty of Law. But now in the Faculty of Law, we have the majority of female teachers. I think that the reason for that is because of a certain pay to university teachers. Men do not want to work for small salaries that are being paid in universities. Well, in terms of the directive, I do not object to that, but I see some transposition issues here due to incitement of hatred on the basis of sex and gender. We see the growing misogyny and the movement of men that are inciting hatred against women. The directive provides for the liability for that. And another point is the violence on the internet. And this regulation, I would say that it's quite positive that the EU is trying to address this issue in terms of the directive. Our life has moved online. We are in social media, and we don't have a proper regulation for social media. And hopefully, this directive will not be adopted only formally to tick some points. Well, it is really very important to avoid doing that. We tend to tick the boxes. We don't have much time left. I want to discuss one aspect, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Šedvytis and then to Mr. Raskevičius. The provision in the program of the government which provides for fight against discrimination and incitement of hatred against different groups and implementation of EU legislation in the area of discrimination. Can you explain that? It seems to be quite abstract. How do you see that? So far, it is very difficult to make an assessment on that. Well, we see in practical terms that police and prosecutor's office does not prosecute for attacking a homosexual person, for example. And we see that very clearly. And in this area, we might ask whether there is certain incentives for the prosecution service and for police. Well, they say that they lack resources, but actually they tend to refuse prosecution against the cases of attacking homosexuals. We've heard one measure. What is your remark on that? In 2020, Lithuania lost the case in the European Court on Human Rights in the case of Bezaras Levickas versus Lithuania. Actually, the attitude towards such cases changed. The prosecution and court judgments was a result of that. And we have changed the case law in Lithuania on that. This is a positive change. But the most important thing is that different communities, LGBT or Roma communities, unfortunately, do not apply to courts or to law and order institutions to defend their rights. I think that here we have to work with the communities in order to build their trust. And we also have to engage in training of prosecutors and police officers on building the trust of communities. I think this is the major key which is achieved through building trust rather than legislation. I want to briefly say, Thomas mentioned the case of Bezaras and Levickas versus Lithuania. The Office of Prosecutor General in Lithuania has made a regulation on prosecuting such cases, and due to that methodology, Lithuania managed to win other similar cases in the European Court on Human Rights. One small remark, despite all these changes, there is actually one case in the European Court of Human Rights on the hate against homosexuals. Renate Kulesh from United Nations Refugee Agency. My question is we have much focus on refugees and their rights and assistance to them in Lithuania, and whether we have the equality among these people in Lithuania. This question is to Mr. Šedvytis and to Monsieur Chiene. I will answer briefly. Well, there's little focus on that. Public attitude towards that is horrible. The problem is not the politicians, but the society or the public that is openly aggressive towards all refugees, with the exception of Ukrainians. And on that, measures that would promote better behavior, mobilization of resources are actually met with a great resistance. This is, well, LGTB rights is an easy topic here because refugees of war is a very painful topic. And a brief comment by Professor Jocienė.
Laurynas probably has said everything. I have nothing to add. It's a very complicated question. Are there any questions in the audience? I see one more hand. Please speak up. We need to hear you in the recording. I'm Vincentas Jacelevičius. We talked about human rights, but nobody mentioned about our duties as the citizens, as human beings, and what are our responsibilities for the state. The other point I want to mention, we should begin to amend the laws on state management, especially from the election code, to get rid of those ambiguities in the previously mentioned documents. What does a double candidate mean? What does that mean? The same candidate is in the single constituency and multi-member constituency. And it's not correct if party has a list of 141 member and the rating, but then allocates no more than 71 to single member constituent list. And every voter could choose their candidate. But the problem would be that those voters who are not able to use computer, they cannot access that information about the candidate, cannot learn about their biography. Another point, these questions are very important for voters because we elected the Seimas. We addressed the previous Seimas many times, and we raised certain questions. What has to be done? What has to be included in the agenda? Have you got questions about human rights? I would like to talk about double seats, about members of parliament who are ministers. How can they do the work? For example, the example of Monica. She refused the post of minister, but she's going to be member of the Seimas. And people will not be able to find out about those candidates. And if we solved that, we could solve many questions. If we manage to elect the right persons to the same, as the situation would be better and very immediately. Thank you for your comment, but has anybody got a question about human rights? Yes, I don't see any more raised hands, so I would like to thank the participants of our discussion. In addition to that, I would like to say that there's a coffee break until 15 to 40 to 12. And after the coffee break, I would like to invite everyone to join other discussions on human rights. And I would like to thank once again for the participants of our discussion.